Well, well, what has the cat dragged in today? It's a tutorial on Plinko. So in this video, we're going to get our level set up. We're going to get all of these various level elements set up and ready to go. It's going to be a little bit of a slog, but I mean, that's any creative profession. There's the really fun, exploratory, I don't know what I'm doing, let's experiment and be cool. And then there's the drudge work, So bear with me. It's 30 minutes or so of tweaking numbers and setting up boxes and cylinders. All right, let's get moving. So I'm going to start off by creating a new scene. So I did a Control N. I'm just going to do the basic built-in create. I'm going to immediately save my scene out to my scenes folder. And I'm going to call this Plinko game. And there's a lot of things to set up here. I'm just going to go through and create things based on the numbers that I came up with in the demo scene that I showed, rather than showing a more organic, hey, let's experiment, try this number, try that number type of format, just to keep things focused. So if you lose track of a number, just pause the video, go back. I'll try to make sure I leave the numbers up for a decent amount of time for each stage. And let's get moving. Let's start off with the background. So I'm going to use a cube for that. So I'm going to right-click 3D Object Cube. I am going to immediately call this background. I'm going to reset my transform just so that it starts off at 0, 0, 0. And for our background, our Z value needs to be set to 1. And then the scale needs to be set to 35 and 20. And if we go look at the game view, we'll see that that takes up the full space, which is, it'll become a little bit easier to visually tell what's going on here after we get everything filled in. So trust me, this is a good size here. Speaking of our camera, I am going to want to move the camera back a little bit, because the further back the camera is, the smaller things are going to appear, right? Because it's a perspective camera. So I am going to change my camera's Z property to -15. I'm also going to change my camera's Y property to 0. So my camera is 0, 0, -15 on the position. Now, before I proceed with the other elements, I am going to pause here for a moment and create the material for the background here. So I'm going to go into my materials folder. Again, functionally not required, but a good idea from an organizational point of view. And I'm going to right-click, create, material. And I'm going to call this background matte. The matte at the end is just a personal thing that I do when naming things. If I create a material, I end it with the suffix of matte, just so that I know what this asset is. With the material created, I'm going to take the albedo and change it. So I'm going to click on the picker, and I am going to choose the background image that I imported from the setup video. I am also, just to make this less shiny and a little bit more dark, I am going to drag the metallic property all the way up to 1 and the smoothness property all the way down to 0. So that way I have no shine on this, and it kind of darkens it up just due to how metallic properties work in Unity's lighting system. Purely optional step. I just think it makes this particular texture look nicer. Next, I'm going to apply this material, I have lots of different ways to do this. I could drag it onto the game object in question in the scene view. I could drag it onto the game object in the hierarchy view. Or if I have it selected in the inspector, I could expand the materials property box under mesh renderer and drag it into there. I'm just going to drag it onto the scene, the game object in the scene view, and be done with it. And so there we go. That's what my screen looks like right now. All right, we have our background set up, so I'm going to go ahead and save. Always remember to save your work as you're going through and working with Unity. It is a relatively stable game engine, but it's a powerful tool. Powerful tools have a tendency of crashing just because they're trying to do so much. Right, let's get our sidewalls put into place. So again, in the hierarchy, I'm going to right-click 3D Object Cube. I am going to reset my transform, so that way my position is starting at 0. I am going to set my X position to -13.5. And then I'm going to set my scale. I'm going to change my Y scale to 20. If I come over here and look at my game view, you can see this is what it's going to look like. So again, X is -13.5, and my scale on the Y is 20. And of course, I do want to rename this. This is my sidewall, my scythe wall, apparently. There we go, sidewall. And then I'm going to duplicate it and change the X position value into a positive number, because I just need it mirrored over on the other side. Now, at this point, you will probably, no guarantee, because Unity is sometimes a little odd about how it handles this, but you will probably notice that things seem really super dark. And that's because even though we're not using any static lighting, we're doing all real-time lighting, Unity still needs some lighting information to be able to correctly render. Which is why, as I said in the previous sequence, that I always leave my lighting window open, because it's so commonly used. If you don't have your lighting window open, you can go to Window, Rendering, Lighting to get that window open. So I am going to pop into my lighting window here real quick and hit Generate Lighting. Now, if you haven't saved your scene yet, it will force you to save your scene, because you can't generate lighting on an unnamed, never saved scene. And there we go. That brightened things up quite nicely. That looks a lot better. Continuing on, let's set up the goals. So I'm going to, again, right-click 3D Object Cube. Let's switch back to scene so we can see what's going on. And I'm going to reset my transform. This time for the position, I am going to set the Y value to -7.75. And then for the scale, it's going to be 4, 2, and we'll just leave Z at 1. So we get this little box whose bottom edge disappears, well, off the bottom. And I'm going to rename this to goal. Now again, we come to a point where I'm going to want to create some new materials. So again, still in my materials folder here in assets, I'm going to right-click, create, material. Now this time I'm going to change the rendering mode from opaque to transparent, because I want these to be transparent boxes so we can still see the background behind them and so we can see the ball pass through them. And then I'm going to take just the color value of albedo, and I'm going to change it to a very strong blue. The exact shade doesn't matter, honestly. You could do purple and green if you wanted to. I'm just using blue and green for this example. And then I'm going to take the alpha value. I'm going to set the alpha value to 100. Keep in mind this is 100 out of a possible 255, so this is a bit less than 50%. And you can see I get this sort of transparentish blue color here. Close out the color wheel. I'm going to name my material Blue Matte, and then I'm going to apply it to the goal. And that's what it looks like. Now I need to duplicate this a bunch of times. So I'm going to duplicate it. And what I am going to do is add 5 to my position. So currently my position X is 0. So I'll set that to 5. Duplicate it again. Set my position to 10. So now we've got these 3 evenly spaced boxes leading off to the right. I can then take these 2 boxes, or I can take this, actually I'll take this box here, duplicate it, set its position to -5, and then take this final box, hit control, oh, I'm on the window key. That's what's going on. By the way, this is really awesome background. You should go check out this guy's DeviantArt page. It also helps to like not have your finger shift over to the window key when trying to do things. You just make sure that nothing else. Yep, okay, everything else is running. Control D. And I will change this value to -10. And that gets me my goals. So I should have a total of 5 goals set up across, nice and evenly spaced. Next to set up are the barriers that I'm going to place in between all of these. So create a cube, which I shall call barrier. Once again, reset the transform. Now for the values on this one, I'm going to start off with a -2.5 on my X, -7 on my Y for the position. And then for the scale, my X is going to be 0.25, so a nice thin little beam. And then the Y scale will be 4. So that is what my barrier looks like. Once again, a bunch of duplications, where I either add or subtract 5. So I'm going to duplicate. By the way, fun fact, you can actually type in math equations here. So if I want to move this 5 over to the left, I can just do -5 and hit enter, and it does the math. Obviously, same thing for going the other way. I could duplicate this and actually just type in +5, and it'll do the math for me. Did I? Nope, I did not. Apparently all of my keyboard shortcut attempts are failing today, because it's just one of those days, apparently. There we go. Now I have the barriers. Again, this key starting position is at -2.5, -7 on the XY. Scale is 0.25 and 4 on the XY, and then moving them over in increments of 5. We're also going to need some, oh, actually, hold on. Before I continue, there is something that I forgot to do, and that is the goals. The goals cannot be solid colliders. We need these to be triggers because I want the ball to go through these, not bounce and rest on the top. So I need to take all of these goals. So I'm going to select all 5 goals. And on the collider options, I am going to check is trigger. So I want to make sure that these goals are all triggers. Final level, well, I shouldn't say final. Two things left on the level related aspect. One is the barrier on the bottom, because once the ball falls down, I need some way of detecting when has it gone down far enough. Lots of ways that we could do this. The way that I am going to show how to do it is, well, if we collide with a specifically named game object, then that's it. We need to reset. So I am going to create another cube, which I shall call bottom. Go ahead and reset. Now, this one I did not record the numbers down on, so I could have at least one object where I showed the process of, okay, here's how I'm going to figure this out. So the scale on the X is pretty easy. I just need it to extend far enough that there shouldn't be any chance that the ball can escape. So actually I'm going to go all the way up to 40 on this, as there is no chance, as long as I keep this close enough to the bottom here, that the ball's going to be able to miss this. So I'm going to drag it down, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to switch to game view here and actually use this position bar here to move it down. I don't want this visible, and I do want it far enough down that the ball can completely disappear before it hits it. And so if I look at this, it's like, yeah, let's do -10. That should allow the ball to just about completely disappear before we reset it back up to the top. And we'll test that in a moment. Speaking of the ball, let's go ahead and create that. So I'm going to right-click 3D Object Sphere, which I shall rename to Ball. I will go ahead and reset that. And for its Y value, I'll put that at 7. So looking at my game view, that puts it right up nice at the top. One thing that I did forget to mention at the start of all of this setup is that I am using a 16:9 aspect ratio. That's just such an automatic setting for me that I forgot to mention that at the start, so apologies for that. But if you look up on things like the Steam hardware survey, which by no means is the be-all, end-all of who's using what, but it's a pretty good indicator. If you look it up on the Steam hardware survey, the overwhelming majority of gaming monitors these days are using a 16:9 aspect ratio. So it's always a good idea to design your game first to work on a 16:9 aspect ratio, and then worry about other aspect ratios. So you do need to make sure that your game aspect ratio is set to this, because if it's like, say, set to free aspect, depending on how big this window is here, things might be looking a bit wonky. Okay, so I have the ball. Now, I do need to add an extra component. So the ball is going to move. And remember, in Unity, anytime an object is going to move in Unity and you want it to have collision information, Unity really wants you to have a rigid body on it. So I am going to add a rigid body, which I already have partially typed in, RIGI, there we go, rigid body. And there's my rigid body stats. There are a couple of things that we need to change. Some of them I will mention in later videos. The ones that I really want to set right now are the freeze position Z, or the one I want to, I should say, the one that I want to set right now is the freeze position Z. because I don't want the ball coming forward or going away from the camera. I want it staying in that Z plane. I want it staying in the 0Z plane. And so I'm going to tell the system to freeze the Z position. The rest of it, the rotation and the XY position, I'm going to leave that unfrozen because I don't care about the rotation. It can rotate however it wants. But I do want it to be able to also move on the X and Y. And if I test this by hitting the play button, what should happen is, well, the expected, the ball falls straight down and then sticks on the bottom. And it's like, okay, that's maybe not quite low enough on the barrier. So I'm going to come back over here to the barrier and type in minus 10.5. Because I don't want it too far down. Because, I mean, if I put it like all the way down there, that would probably work because the ball would have to go off at one crazy and I think literally impossible angle to be able to miss this, but it would take too long for the game to reset. So I don't want it all the way down there. I want it fairly up close. So maybe a negative 10.25. I want the ball to have just enough space to disappear off the screen before I reset. There we go. That works perfect. So our final values for the bottom piece is a y of negative 10.25, a scale of 40 on the x, and those are the two changes. Going back to the ball real quick, we are done with this. There's nothing else that we are going to manipulate at the moment. So the final thing that we need to do is set up the pegs that the ball is going to bounce off of. Before I do that, I am going to clean up here a little bit. So I'm going to create some empty game objects since I'm going to want to do that for the pegs right now anyways. So Control-Shift-N. I'm going to call this underscore level. Oops, let's do that with a capital L if we don't mind. Go ahead and reset that game object. I am going to take basically everything that's like static level geometry. So the sidewall, the backgrounds, barriers. I'm going to dump that all into level. I'm going to leave the goals out. Also under level, I'm going to create another empty game object, which I shall call pegs, because there's going to be a lot of these, so I want to keep track of these separate. And in my pegs category, I'm going to right-click 3D object cylinder. And then I'm going to rotate the cylinder 90 degrees so that it's facing me. And if I look at this, well, based on this orientation, if I needed to rotate towards me, I'd be rotating around this line, which is X. So I will come over here to X, type in 90, and yay, I am good. Raise this up a little bit. And I'm just going to roughly place one in front of each hole. Go ahead and take all of these, duplicate it, drag it all the way down, duplicate it sort of in the middle. Off shift it a little bit. And then I'm going to want to make sure on this like end one here, I'm going to embed it a little bit more into the wall because I don't want that chance for the ball to be stuck there. And then I'm going to duplicate it and just reverse the sign on its X position so that way it is perfectly mirrored over there. Now, this may or may not be a good setup. The key thing here is that we want to make this interesting but not frustrating. So we could, and this would be a bad idea, don't do this. We could duplicate it and do something crazy like this. So that way there's just like tons of bumpers everywhere, and it's like almost impossible to figure out where the ball is going to go. Just hammered Control-Z there for a bit to undo those changes. But I want to actually be able to properly test this, so I'm going to leave it fairly simple, and I still might come back through and tweak these settings a little bit. And if we test, yeah, depending on how you have your thing set up, it's probably not going to work very well. The ball is just going to fall down and stick to a pillar. If you move the pillar or the ball slightly off to the side, then it won't stick, but it's still not going to really behave like we would expect. But this is actually what we would expect, given how the physics system works. So, one last thing here for us to fix, and that is adding in a physics material. I don't have a folder for that, so I am going to create a folder. So I'm going back into my assets area, and I'm doing a right-click, create folder. I'm going to call this physical materials. Always a good idea to keep everything nice, neat, and organized. And then I'm going to right-click, create. And I always have to look for this one a little bit. There it is, physic material. Sort of towards the bottom. And it's this property right here that we need to change, bounciness between 0 and 1. In other words, we are returning 0% of our energy or 100% of our energy. I want these things to be fairly bouncy, so I'm going to set this to 0.6. Now notice it also says the bounce combine is the average. So if something doesn't have a physics material, the bounciness factor is going to be 0. I could apply this physics material to the ball and all of the pegs, or I could just simply change this from average to maximum and say, okay, whatever the max value is, that's the one we're going to use, which is going to be the 0.6. Also, I'm going to rename this to ball fizz mat. And I'm going to add it to the ball. Again, several different ways. I could drag it onto it, or I could go into the inspector, and under the collider, there is a material property under the collider, which wants a physic material. So I can drag it into that slot. And now if I hit the play button, boing, it's bouncy. Which is precisely what we want. And that is the setup. We are now good to go for doing the programming and functionality of this in the following videos. As per usual, if you learned something from this video, found it useful, thumbs up would be appreciated. If you didn't get much from it, give me a thumbs down so I can do better next time. And with that, until the next video.